The dawn of July 16th, 1808, arrived quietly over the Andalusian hills near Bailén, Spain. French soldiers, veterans of Napoleon's victories across Europe, were on the march. But despite their experience and prior triumphs, they were unaware that they were heading into a confrontation that would shatter their confidence and mark a turning point in the Peninsular War. Facing them were Spanish forces, a mix of regulars, local volunteers and untrained peasants. These defenders of Spain, though less disciplined than the French, were driven by a determination to expel the foreign occupiers from their homeland. The resulting clash would become known as the Battle of Bailén, a rare and humiliating defeat for Napoleon's forces that sent shockwaves across Europe. The Peninsular War had erupted when French forces invaded Spain in early 1808, swiftly capturing Madrid and installing Napoleon's brother Joseph Bonaparte as king. While it seemed that Spain was subdued, resistance had ignited across the nation. Cities, towns and villages rose up in defiance. Guerrilla warfare, previously unheard of on this scale, became a nightmare for the French, disrupting their supply lines and stretching their forces thin. The Battle of Bailén would become the Spanish people's first significant organized resistance against Napoleon's formidable army. Commanding the French forces in Andalusia was General Pierre Dupont de l'Etang, an officer with extensive experience under Napoleon. His mission was to secure Andalusia and eventually continue to Cadiz. However, as Dupont's army advanced, logistical problems grew. The summer heat bore down on the troops, while supplies of food and water ran dangerously low. In this vulnerable state, Dupont and his 20,000 soldiers began a retreat toward Madrid, hoping to escape the rising tide of resistance. Unbeknownst to Dupont, Spanish forces under General Francisco Castaños and General Theodore Reding were preparing to intercept him. The Spanish had a plan: to trap Dupont and block his retreat. Aware that his troops were fatigued, Dupont was reluctant to engage in a major battle and aimed to withdraw to safer ground. But the Spanish forces anticipated his movements. As Dupont's weary soldiers approached Bailén, they found themselves surrounded, with Spanish troops closing in on all sides. The unforgiving July heat, dwindling supplies, and the constant threat of Spanish ambushes had worn the French down. Morale was low, and the sight of Spanish forces prepared for battle struck a deep blow to the exhausted soldiers. On July 19th, the battle began. Spanish soldiers, despite their lack of formal military training, advanced with courage and determination. The rugged terrain around Bailén offered natural fortifications for the Spanish, who took up positions on the hills and ridges, firing down upon the French troops. The French soldiers, who had previously dismissed the Spanish as undisciplined, were quickly overwhelmed by the tenacity of their opponents. Spanish artillery blasted through the French lines, while Spanish infantry, supported by local villagers, pressed forward in relentless waves. The oppressive heat compounded the French struggle, draining their strength and making the battle even more grueling. Dupont ordered his men to hold their positions and resist the Spanish attacks. French officers shouted commands, urging their troops to stand firm, but the Spanish forces continued to press their advantage. From the hills, Spanish marksmen fired down upon the French, while units of infantry advanced through the trees, closing in on the weakened French defences. The French soldiers, now severely weakened by hunger and exhaustion, found it increasingly difficult to fend off the advancing Spaniards. The sheer weight of the Spanish numbers began to push the French back. The intensity of the Spanish attacks shocked the French. Dupont had expected resistance, but he had underestimated the level of coordination and resolve among the Spanish forces. Spanish soldiers displayed a unity that Dupont had rarely seen in Napoleon's other campaigns. As Spanish artillery pounded the French lines, Dupont realized the gravity of his situation. The French lines, once tightly organized, began to waver as Spanish soldiers advanced steadily, bolstered by their success and the unwavering support of the local population. Amid the chaos, Dupont attempted to rally his men, but the mounting casualties and lack of supplies left the French army in a desperate state. French soldiers began to collapse under the intense summer heat, their uniforms soaked in sweat, their bodies weakened by hunger. Spanish forces, however, showed no signs of relenting. The sight of the French retreating bolstered Spanish morale, and the Spanish soldiers, sensing victory, pushed even harder. Each wave of Spanish infantry seemed to chip away at the French defences, forcing them into a tighter formation as they struggled to hold their ground. As the battle continued, Dupont became increasingly aware that his army was on the brink of collapse. His officers reported widespread exhaustion among the troops, and attempts to resupply them with food and water had largely failed. The French artillery, once a powerful tool in Napoleon's conquests, proved ineffective against the Spanish, who attacked from multiple directions. Spanish forces managed to close in on the French lines, attacking from all sides and breaking through the defences in several places. By the afternoon, Dupont knew he was facing the unthinkable, a decisive defeat. In one final attempt to regain control, he ordered a bayonet charge, hoping to break the Spanish lines and create an opening for his troops to escape. The French soldiers, driven by desperation, surged forward, but the Spanish held firm. The clash of bayonets and muskets filled the air as both sides fought with everything they had. However, the French were simply too exhausted and outnumbered. The Spanish soldiers, determined to protect their land, fought with relentless energy, repelling the charge and pushing the French back. Realizing that the battle was lost, Dupont faced a harsh choice. Continuing to fight would mean certain death for his remaining men. But surrendering to an enemy they had considered inferior was a bitter pill to swallow. Nevertheless, he saw no other option. On the evening of July 22nd, Dupont signalled his willingness to negotiate. The terms were humiliating for the French. Dupont's entire army would surrender, laying down their arms to the Spanish. For the first time, a major French force had been defeated, and the Spanish resistance had proven its strength. The Battle of Bailén sent shockwaves through Europe. News of the French defeat spread rapidly, inspiring Spanish resistance movements across the country and shattering the myth of French invincibility. For the Spanish people, the victory was a moment of triumph, a symbol of hope in their struggle against Napoleon's occupation. The victory at Bailén showed that the French could be beaten, igniting a spirit of resistance that would continue to fuel the Peninsular War. For Napoleon, the defeat was a harsh reminder of the limits of his empire. Bailén exposed the vulnerability of his forces when fighting in hostile terrain against a determined population. Napoleon was furious upon learning of the defeat and considered Dupont's surrender a disgrace. The failure at Bailén marked a turning point in the Peninsular War, galvanizing Spanish resistance and inspiring Britain and Portugal to support Spain in its fight against the French. In the aftermath, the Peninsular War intensified. Spanish forces, emboldened by their victory, continued to resist the French occupation with newfound vigour. Guerrilla warfare became a staple of the conflict, with Spanish fighters targeting French supply lines, ambushing small units, and undermining Napoleon's efforts to control the region. The Battle of Bailén had shown that ordinary citizens could rise up against one of the world's most powerful armies. Spain's resistance would become a thorn in Napoleon's side, draining resources and complicating his plans for domination. The legacy of the Battle of Bailén was profound. It marked the first time a French army was forced to surrender to a local resistance force, altering the course of the Peninsular War and establishing Spain as a symbol of defiance against tyranny. For the Spanish people, Bailén became a source of pride and a rallying cry, a testament to their resilience and determination to defend their homeland. Napoleon's forces, once viewed as invincible, had been humbled by a force that defied traditional military expectations.